What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I want to talk to you about the Onslaught Saga. I have this series in these 4 epic collections. I'll show each of them to you. There's volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, and volume 4. But this event, which is from the mid-90s, 96 or 97, I think, has been collected several times over the years, and each time that it's collected, I feel like it's collected in a different order, and there are issues collected in some collections that are not collected in others. It took me a couple of years to actually find and gather all of these. I bought them all in various stores that I went to, found them all in the wild, because there were a couple of volumes that when you look for them online, like on eBay, they were a little pricey for my taste, so I thought that I lucked out and found the whole saga for pretty cheap, pretty inexpensive. But turns out there are some issues that are collected. There's an omnibus that came out a few years ago that's now very pricey, very expensive. I'm pretty sure it's out of print. There are issues in that omnibus that are not collected in either of these 4 volumes. Very recently, just a few months ago, there was another collection. I think it was just called X-Men Avengers Onslaught Volume 1, and it collects stuff that's not collected in these 4 books. Back in the late 90s, there were 6 trade paperbacks that collected pretty much everything that you find in these. There's some stuff in these books that are not collected in those, and those 6 trade paperbacks from the 90s, they would only have like 4 or 5 issues each. Pretty slim as far as trade paperbacks go, but if you happen to find all of those, you're pretty much going to get the whole Onslaught story. And part of the problem is when this story was coming out, they weren't conceiving of it in a way where it would be easy to consume 30 years later. They were just thinking, okay, we're just going to do this, and then we're going to have a little bit of an Onslaught tie-in over here, and they weren't thinking of it in a way that it could be streamlined and you can just very easily read from point A to point B. It was kind of, here's something that happens, and then here's 3 or 4 issues that kind of bounce off of how that thing happened, and then you go into these other issues that are bouncing off of those issues, and so there is no right way to read and enjoy the Onslaught story. Basically, I feel like you can read the X-Men, Avengers, and Fantastic Four issues that are collected here, and you can kind of get the gist of the story. There are other issues that are in these 4 books that are also collected in the recent collection and the omnibus that, in my opinion, you can skip. And this reminds me of back when I was in high school and I was reading Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was just the 12-issue Crisis on Infinite Earths maxi series, but there would be a little footnote at the bottom where Knucklon from Infinity Inc. would say, I've got to go look for my stepdad, and then that would happen in an issue of Crisis, and I was thinking, man, I wish they would collect that issue too. I wanted everything that had anything to do with Crisis on Infinite Earths, even the smallest thing. If there was just a red sky in one panel of an issue of Johnny Thunder, I wanted that. I wanted everything that had something to do with Crisis. Now, I just want the story. I don't want all of this stuff that frankly doesn't really have anything to do with the main Onslaught event. There are so many issues in the 2nd and 3rd volumes that I have here that really slowed me down on reading this. I read volume 1 and I really enjoyed it. I really wasn't sure what I was getting into because in the 1990s, the 1990s has a really bad reputation for superhero comic books, especially the big summer events. They happen so frequently, a lot of people kind of complain like they happen all the time and they didn't have a lot of weight to them because something big will happen and then you barely have any time for the characters and the series to breathe before you're setting up the next big event. And that's happening here. Before the conclusion of the Onslaught story even happens, they were already setting up Operation Zero Tolerance, which was a story that I actually quite liked. I read Zero Tolerance a few years ago and I was surprised how much I enjoyed that story. But then you have something like this. I really wasn't sure what I was getting into because some of the 90s events are not great, or at least they don't have a reputation for being great, and then some of them I really enjoy. I liked Fatal Attractions a lot more than I thought I would. I liked Operation Zero Tolerance a lot more than I thought I would. Pretty much everyone agrees that The Age of Apocalypse is really good, but I hadn't heard a whole lot of people say very many positive things about the Onslaught saga, so I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought maybe this is as bad as everyone says, or maybe I'm going to enjoy myself and surprise myself with how much I enjoy it, much like I did with Fatal Attractions or for Operation Zero Tolerance. And the first volume is really good. So let's hold that up again here. You got this guy. If you've never heard of the Onslaught Saga, you don't know what it's about. Basically, in the Fatal Attraction storyline, Magneto is ripping all of the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. He's in excruciating agony, and so Professor X, he is enraged, and he mind wipes Magneto. He basically just lobotomizes Magneto, saying like, no, you've gone too far, you've crossed the line. So in that moment, the worst aspects of Magneto and Charles Xavier merge, and they start percolating inside Charles Xavier's psyche. And then at the beginning of this book, you start to have Xavier. He's acting weird and creepy. No one really knows what's going on. A few characters are saying like, Xavier's acting really weird, but no one knows really what's going on. And I talked here recently about the book Bishop's Crossing, which was the first appearances of Bishop and where Bishop first joins the X-Men. And almost immediately after he joins the X-Men, he tells them that he recently found out that the X-Men were betrayed by one of their own. And then we get to see a little flashback issue where he is looking at this 80-year-old message from Jean Grey, and it's really broken up. You're only getting parts of the message, but it's making it pretty clear that the X-Men were betrayed by someone. And it says something like, we shouldn't have trusted, and then you don't get the rest of the message. And so Bishop was 100% sure that it was Gambit, because Gambit was the newest member of the X-Men at that time. And I talked a little bit in that video about how I feel like the people who were introducing Bishop at that time, maybe they had it in mind that Bishop was going to be the one to betray the X-Men. He didn't have that as part of some plan. It was just going to happen kind of naturally, and he didn't realize that he would become the traitor that he had spent his whole life, fighting against the traitor's work. I kind of feel like that was what was being planned when Bishop was first introduced, but that was like 3 or 4 years before everything that we see here. And so by the time the Onslaught Saga is happening in the Marvel Comics, there was almost an entirely different group of people working on these stories. So they were not going by any plans that might have been laid down when Bishop was introduced. In fact, I'm pretty sure none of this was planned out. The legend has it that the X-Men editors took all of the writers who were working on the X-Men books and said, what is something you guys would like to do? We would like to take whatever you want to do and try to do our best to make it happen. And so Warren Ellis was on Excalibur, and he wanted to do an entire issue where the team just goes and gets wasted at a pub. And that happens in his run. And Scott Lobdell, who was working on X-Men and Uncanny X-Men around this time, he said, what if there's this bad guy? We don't know anything about him. His name is Onslaught, and he's able to punch Juggernaut clear across the entire country. And everyone says, okay, cool. Who is Onslaught? And he said, I don't know. And so they had this mysterious character named Onslaught that had been whispered about and hinted at for a little while before you even get to the events of Volume 1. There was this character. He would show up on the astral plane, and Gateway would be freaking out. Gateway, who was introduced in the 80s, he was their Aborigine friend who could teleport them. Chamber, who was in Generation X, at one point, he met Onslaught, and then Onslaught erased his memories of meeting him. There was all this stuff that was happening with Onslaught, and at the time that all of this lead-up was happening, I'm pretty sure nobody knew who Onslaught was. The idea of tying it into the end of Fatal Attractions, where Professor X mind wipes Magneto, that came pretty late in the game. And you can tell because when you look at this and everyone finally figures out, oh, Xavier is Onslaught, you go back and look at some of the stuff leading up to it, and in these books there would be a text page saying, like, previously in the Marvel Universe, all of this stuff happened. And that's in each of these books because they don't want to collect, 400 pages of stuff that might kind of tie in with Onslaught, so you'll get a quick text page saying, this happened and the stuff leading up to this. When you look at that, and then you look at the reveal, it starts to make sense that they didn't have all of this planned out in advance. Why would Xavier reveal himself to Chamber and then wipe his mind? That's because they didn't have it planned out. The only thing that actually makes a little bit of sense is Xavier had a really crappy childhood thanks to his older stepbrother, and so once he gets evil telepathic powers, he decides to beat up on the Juggernaut. That makes a little bit of sense. But the first volume here, I think, is really good. Xavier's acting creepy. Onslaught is in the background. Everyone knows that there's this evil bad guy named Onslaught, but no one knows who he is or what he wants. And then the X-Men, they're at the mansion mansion, the Juggernaut shows up, and he asks Jean Grey for help. So she takes him to this room beneath the mansion, this telepathy-proof room that dates all the way back to the Silver Age X-Men stuff. And then Jean finds out that Professor X is Onslaught. The X-Men, they don't know. It's all really cool. It builds up to this really cool battle with Onslaught where the X-Men just get their butts handed to them. Jean is able to record the message that Bishop read and recited to the X-Men back when he was first introduced. And when you look at these comics side by side, when you look at the message that Jean recites and records in Volume 1, and then you look at what Bishop listened to, it's very clear that they had to find some weird ways to bend what Jean is saying to match what was in that comic, because in the message that Bishop listened to in Bishop's Crossing, Jean says, "We were fools to trust blank," and it wants you to think she's saying we were fools to trust Gambit. But really what she's saying is we were fools to trust that there was no aftermath to Professor Xavier mind-wiping Magneto. Something weird like that, where it's like, okay, they're trying to make it fit with what was happening, but again, it's very clear that they did not have any of this planned out from the beginning. So anyway, Volume 1, I think, is really solid, and that's about where the good things that I have to say about this event ends. Volume 2 and Volume 3 is really where this event treads water. Let me see if I can find Volume 2 here. Here's Volume 2. Got Wolverine here. This is when, without any adamantium, he just goes crazy. When he doesn't have his mask on, he doesn't have a nose. I am not joking about that. They were drawing Wolverine without a nose for some reason. Anyway, this is where I slowed down a lot on reading this event, because there were a lot of issues in this book that I feel like did not need to be here. Let me look at the back here. You have an issue of Punisher. Punisher issue 11. In that issue, the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier crashes into the ocean, and then the Punisher decides, okay, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are going to need my help because there's these gangsters over here on boats. They're going to try and loot the helicarrier, and they're going to kill any S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that get in their way. It's a fine issue, I guess. I don't really care about the Punisher. I don't read Punisher. It's fine, I guess. It has absolutely no bearing on the main Onslaught story. It's collected here because it is part of the aftermath of Onslaught attacking New York City, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the Onslaught character himself. I'm pretty sure Onslaught doesn't even show up in the book. I don't think the Avengers or the X-Men do. There are like 3 or 4 issues of Spider-Man here. Let's see, there's Sensational Spider-Man issue 8, Amazing Spider-Man 415, and Spider-Man 72. And I didn't really need any of those. I don't have anything against Spider-Man, but none of these issues really have anything to do with Onslaught. You get to see how all these characters are dealing with Onslaught attacking New York City. He was able to take over a Sentinel factory, and then he was able to reprogram the Sentinels, so they go out and they are terrorizing New York City, and they're looking for mutants who might oppose Onslaught so that they can destroy the mutants before they can fight against Onslaught. And so you get all these issues of Spider-Man, and you're getting this issue of the Punisher, where you get to see these characters who are not front and center part of this event, and you're getting to see what they were doing during this event. And this is where I am very different from my high school self. When I was in high school, I would have wanted every single thing that had even a little bit to do with Onslaught. I would have absolutely just devoured these issues of Spider-Man. There's an issue of the Green Goblin. Did you guys know that Ben Urich's nephew was the Green Goblin in the 90s, and he fought crime as the Green Goblin, and he had his own series for about a year? There's an issue of the Green Goblin here where Phil Urich, he is thinking to himself, man, I'm such a coward, I can't go out there and fight the Sentinels, and then he goes out there and he fights the Sentinels. And, okay, I don't care, though. This has nothing to do with Onslaught himself. And so, after the high that I was on from reading Volume 1, I was really into it. I really liked the creepy atmosphere of it, and how there was a mystery, and then it's kind of revealed slowly to the audience and the characters. I liked all of that, and then Volume 2 just stops me dead in my tracks. It took me so much longer to read this entire event because I just didn't care what was happening to the Green Goblin or Spider-Man or the Punisher. Now, there were some issues in this that were kind of important. There's a couple of issues of X-Factor here that you get some stuff like, okay, there's a traitor who's part of the X-Factor crew, Alex Summers. He's been brainwashed by the Dark Beast, and then later you find out that Alex was actually just pretending to be brainwashed. That doesn't happen here. That happens much later. But there's some stuff that's kind of important, like Onslaught taking over the Sentinel factory. That happens in those issues of X-Factor. But since none of that really has anything to do with the defeat of Onslaught and the progression of the Onslaught story, you could almost skip Volume 2 here with Wolverine. I'm looking, I don't think there's anything in this volume that was actually very important in the main meat of the story. There's a few pages from an issue of Excalibur where you find out that Professor Xavier had the Xavier protocols, and that kind of becomes a thing in the issues coming after the Onslaught saga, where Professor Xavier made these Batman-esque files on how to defeat each of the X-Men if the occasion called for it, which that doesn't even come into play. You would think if Professor Xavier has turned evil that you would use the Xavier protocols, because he had protocols on himself as well. You would think those would have been very important, but no, after that issue of Excalibur, you don't get anything else on the Xavier protocols in this event. So if you are reading these complete epics, you could pretty much just skip Volume 2. It might look weird on your shelf having Volume 1, Volume 3, Volume 4, but very little happens in Volume 2, and that really slowed me down on reading this whole event. Then you get Volume, nope, that's Volume 1. Sorry, I have these just kind of all over the place. Then you get Volume 3 here, where I feel like a little bit more happens in Volume 3. Professor Xavier, he had a childlike hologram of himself. At this point, Professor Xavier is Onslaught, he's evil, and he is projecting this psychic illusion of himself to Franklin Richards of the Fantastic Four. And he wants to kidnap Franklin Richards and absorb his godlike abilities, because Franklin Richards has always been super powerful, and Onslaught wants to add his power to his own. And I guess I should talk about what Onslaught's big evil plan is. At one point, he is talking to the Dark Beast, who is the Beast from the Age of Apocalypse. And the Beast from the Age of Apocalypse is evil, and he was pretending to be the Beast. He had kidnapped regular Beast, non-Dark Beast, and was hanging out at the mansion pretending to be him, and somehow nobody noticed that this was not their Beast. Jean is telepathic, and she did not notice this. Now later, Onslaught says, I noticed, but I didn't care. I thought it was funny that you were pretending to be our Beast. But anyway, he was hiding out in the mansion because he didn't want Mr. Sinister to get him. Basically, Mr. Sinister was mad that his own research was being used because in the Age of Apocalypse, Dark Beast was a student of Mr. Sinister, and then in our reality, Dark Beast was using what he had learned from the Age of Apocalypse Mr. Sinister, and that's where a lot of the Morlocks came from. They were experimented on by the Dark Beast, and that's the explanation for why Mr. Sinister sent the Marauders to go and exterminate the Morlocks, because he saw his own research being used and he didn't like that. So Dark Beast is hiding out in the X-Mansion away from Mr. Sinister. And then as soon as Onslaught reveals himself, Dark Beast says, hey, I'd like to join you and be your lackey. And that happens, and then I don't know whatever happens to Dark Beast. He just kind of vanishes from this. At one point, Beast escapes from the little prison that Dark Beast had him in, and then he rejoins the rest of the X-Men and the other heroes who are fighting against Onslaught. But then Dark Beast just kind of vanishes from this because Onslaught, he has some of his allies who are working with him. There's a character called Post, who basically looks like a big Play-Doh guy with like rocks stuck to him. And then there's his name is either Holocaust or Nemesis. He's the big fiery guy who was first introduced in the Age of Apocalypse, and then this is the Marvel Universe version of him, I think, or maybe that's the Age of Apocalypse version, I really don't know. But there are all these characters who work for Apocalypse, and then they work for Onslaught, and then they barely do anything here. There's one issue of Avengers where Captain America is able to trick Nemesis / Holocaust into destroying Post, and that's like the last time we see these guys, and then they don't show up again. But anyway, Onslaught is able to read memories from a couple different characters. Bishop, long story short, had spent some time in the Age of Apocalypse, and he still had some memories from that world. And Onslaught looks at his memories and says, I want to create something kind of like that, but a little bit more benevolent. He says that at one point. He says he wants to be a slightly more benevolent version of the Tyrant Apocalypse from that reality. But then, by the end of this event, he's decided, no, mutants and humans, they're not worthy of me being their leader, so I'm just going to destroy everybody. And it really feels cheesy. This feels like a cartoon that you watched when you were a kid, where the bad guy is just evil, and that's their only characteristic. Mwahaha, I'm going to destroy the world. And you hear about that kind of thing all the time, the bad guy who wants to destroy the world. You very rarely see it. This is actually a bad guy who just wants to destroy the world. And it's disappointing because Magneto and Professor Xavier are both much more complex characters than this. And the idea of the worst aspects of Magneto and Charles Xavier merging together is really interesting. What if you also took some of the good aspects of those characters? What if Onslaught still wants everybody to be reunited? He wants mutants and humans to be coexisting together, but he wants to be their their leader. He wants to be in charge of everything. Professor X wants unity among mutants and humans, but he doesn't want to be in charge. Magneto, he sees himself as a savior of mutant kind. What if Onslaught also sees himself as a savior, but he's just a little bit more ambitious, and he's a little bit more willing to swipe away all the humans. Magneto, he sees himself as above humanity, but up until this point, we never really saw him wanting to exterminate humanity. So what if you took the best aspects of these characters and the worst aspects, and you created a character who is very terrifying, but also makes a little bit of sense as Magneto plus Charles Xavier equals this guy. But once Onslaught is revealed as being this big evil villain, basically his personality is, I am evil, and that's about it. So he wants to absorb Franklin Richards' abilities, and then he also kidnaps X-Man, who is also from the Age of Apocalypse, and he wants to absorb his powers, and then the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and the X-Men, they all have to work together to stop Onslaught from doing all this evil stuff. And then at the end, basically, the Fantastic Four and most of the Avengers, they have to sacrifice themselves to stop Onslaught from destroying everything. Because at one point, I forgot to even mention this, and I'm going to stop talking about what happens in each individual volume at this point, because it all kind of blurs together at this point. But at one point, they are able to separate Charles Xavier from Onslaught, because Onslaught was Xavier. There's this one page in Volume 1 that looks really cool, where Xavier is just kind of floating in the air, and then you see Onslaught like around him. It looks really cool, and it's like, okay, Onslaught is a combination of Magneto and Charles Xavier, but he's Xavier. He's physically part of Xavier. But then Onslaught just reaches into himself and takes Xavier out and throws him to the heroes and says, here, you can have him. And Xavier is depowered at this point, and I feel like that kind of deflates the stakes a little bit, because I think it would have been really cool if the X-Men are saying, look, yes, Onslaught has done some really terrible stuff. He's destroyed a lot of New York City, but it's Professor X. He's like a father to us. We can't kill him. And then maybe the Avengers, they're saying, look, we understand that he's like a father to you guys, but look at everything he's done. We have to stop him no matter what the cost. And I don't know. I don't think the Avengers like killing people, but in a case like this, you know, the stakes are really high. The world is about to be destroyed. You could maybe make a case that some of the Avengers are kind of okay with it. And then eventually maybe some of the X-Men are like, yeah, we kind of have to kill him. This has gone too long. But pretty early in the story, they separate Xavier from Onslaught, and at that point I'm thinking, okay, now they can just very easily defeat Onslaught without any real lasting consequences. Now, Xavier is depowered, and then at the end of this event, he feels guilty about what all Onslaught has done, and so he turns himself over to the United States government because he feels like Onslaught is his responsibility. And then that leads into Operation Zero Tolerance. So there are some effects that this book has, this event has on the Marvel Universe, but I feel like it could have been a lot bigger. I feel like if Xavier was Onslaught, if it was an evil Xavier and not this psychic thing that evolved in Xavier's mind and then separated itself from Xavier, I think it could have been even better. But anyway, so basically he has this Magneto-esque armor, here it is, has this, you know, Magneto-looking armor here, and then that is destroyed in Volume 4, and everyone's like, yay, we did it! And then it's like, no, just kidding, it's kind of like the end of Ghostbusters. They physically destroyed him, but his psychic entity is still out in the open, and he's like, yeah, I could take anyone's body now. And so then, because Onslaught was born from two mutants, if a mutant touches this psychic stuff floating around, then Onslaught will go stronger. And so all these other characters, they have to like jump into this psychic stuff that's floating out, and then that will prevent him from taking on another body, I think. It's really weird. It makes no sense, but some of the X-Men are about to jump in too, and Reed Richards says, no, you can't. If you do, he will grow stronger. So all the Fantastic Four and most of the Avengers, they jump into this psychic stuff, and then they all seemingly die. And the Hulk, he's not a member of the Avengers, but he's in there too. And then that happens. And then the X-Men and Franklin Richards and Quicksilver, they're all like, wow, they were heroes, they sacrificed themselves. And then the rest of the world saw this happen, and so they're like, shame on you, mutants, you allowed our greatest heroes to die. And so then for a little while after this, we have a world without heroes, which could have been really cool, and I don't really know how that developed. Did Spider-Man take it on himself to be more of a hero? You know, he's a hero, but most people don't see him that way. So is he trying to go above and beyond to protect the people of New York because the Avengers and the Fantastic Four aren't here? I know the Thunderbolts, that spun out of this, where the spoilers, but the Masters of Evil, they have disguised themselves as new heroes to fill the void left by the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. So even if this event is kind of hot garbage, at least we got the Thunderbolts out of that. But anyway, it turns turns out that the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are not dead. Franklin Richards had subconsciously created another world, and the Avengers, the Hulk, and the Fantastic Four, they go to this other world, and then they get new origin stories, they get their powers again. It kind of feels like a precursor to the Ultimate Universe, where someone was saying these characters have some really weird histories, really complicated, confusing histories. The Iron Man, in his first appearance, he wrestles a big fat dude. So maybe we could do this as an opportunity to kind of recreate their origin stories, clear some of the clutter away. By this point, Tony Stark was a teenager from the past. Maybe we could kind of streamline these characters a little bit. So when the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and the Hulk all die in the Onslaught story, they go to an alternate world, and that is where you get Heroes Reborn. And you have probably heard about that. You've at least seen the picture of Captain America where one pectoral muscle comes out like 1 foot past another one. So that is Heroes Reborn. And I have not read any of that. I have not heard anything good about any of that. It didn't last very long. It lasted maybe a year and a half. And then Heroes Return was where all those characters came back to the Marvel Universe. It was a really weird thing where they were wanting to do a reboot that was free from all the continuity that came before, but then if I'm a brand new reader and I come into a comic book shop for the first time and I buy issue 1 of Fantastic Four from Heroes Reborn, and it's basically their origin story, and then I go and look at this issue of the X-Men that's going on, and the X-Men are talking about, rest in peace Fantastic Four, you guys sacrifice yourselves, I'm thinking, what's going on? I don't understand. So it's a really weird thing where they wanted to create a continuity-free new origins for these characters, but you've still got the rest of the Marvel Universe that's still going on. But eventually those characters came back to the Marvel Universe, and then the Heroes Reborn stuff was basically forgotten and ignored. So anyway, I did not care for this. I think that it could have been really cool. The premise is really interesting. Unfortunately, that's about the only good thing that I can say about this event. And like I said, there are different collections of this story. Each one I feel like is presented in a different way and has different issues. There's an issue of X-Men Unlimited where Rogue and Joseph, that is a character who is a clone of Magneto, but at the time everyone believed that this was Magneto who had been de-aged, but then later we find out no, Magneto's still out there, this guy's just a clone that someone else created. But there's an issue of X-Men Unlimited where Rogue and Joseph, they go and do something, and that is not collected in any of these books. It probably didn't need to be. Generally X-Men Unlimited was kind of a thing on its own where stuff is happening but it's not part of the main event. So like the Fatal Attractions storyline had an issue of X-Men Unlimited that you could pretty easily skip, but it's still something that you might want to read. So anyway, that's not collected in any of these, but it is collected, I think, in the Omnibus and maybe in the X-Men Avengers Onslaught book that came out earlier this year. So anyway, that's about all that I have to say about the Onslaught saga. I guess I like the idea of it. In 15 years, when the X-Men are part of the MCU, I'd love to see an actual good version of the Onslaught story play out in a big film, kind of a huge epic story, kind of like Infinity War and Endgame, something kind of like that. But for now, I think this is best left not talked about. Let's just pretend this thing didn't happen. You got some good events in the 90s, but this is not one of them. So anyway, that's all that I had to say about the Onslaught saga. So anyway, I will see you guys in the future. Have a good one.